Have you ever been humiliated? Not by strangers, not by enemies, but by your own mother, in a room full of people dressed in elegance under lights so bright you can barely see, and yet somehow you can feel every single pair of eyes on you. Imagine standing there frozen, your heart pounding so loud it drowns out the music, and then hearing her voice echo through the microphone. At least she found a husband, even if we don't know what he does for a living. And then it happens, the laughter. Not polite laughter, not awkward laughter, real laughter. The kind that cuts straight through you, that turns you into a story everyone will remember tomorrow. That was the moment everything inside me cracked. My name is Diana. I'm 32 years old. And 3 weeks ago at my father's retirement dinner, I became the joke of the night. There were 150 guests in that ballroom business. Partners, investors, family friends, people who had watched me grow up, people who smiled at me for years. But in that moment, not a single one of them was on my side. My father was smiling, my sister was smirking, and my husband, the man they had quietly judged for 4 years, sat beside me in silence. You know what hurts the most? It's not the words. It's realizing that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who put you on display. That night wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance, and I was the punchline. I remember gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my fingers went numb. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. But it didn't. Instead, I sat there forced to smile, forced to breathe, while my own mother continued speaking as if she had just said something charming. And the worst part, this wasn't new. This was just louder, just more public, just impossible to ignore. For years I had learned how to shrink myself in rooms like that. Speak less. Smile more. Don't react. Don't embarrass the family. Because in my family, appearances were everything. Success was measured in money, status, titles. And me, I was the daughter who chose something less. A teacher. Someone who didn't bring in millions, who didn't close deals, who didn't make headlines. I was the one they tolerated, not celebrated. And my husband, he was the mystery they never bothered to solve. He works in education, I would say. And they would nod politely, the way people nod when they've already decided you're not important. But that night, something was different. Because when the laughter died down, when the last echo of humiliation settled into my chest, I felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, something sharper, something final. I looked at my husband, expecting to see the same quiet patience he had always shown, the same calm acceptance. But instead, I saw something else. And that was the moment I realized this night wasn't going to end the way my family expected. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people who should lift you up, if you've ever sat in silence while someone else told your story wrong, I need you to stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. But before we go further, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family in public? Not just criticized, but turned into a joke? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and trust me, you're not alone. What if the people who raised you were also the ones who quietly taught you that you were never enough? Not with one big moment, not with one cruel sentence, but with 1,000 small cuts spread across years so subtle, you almost convinced yourself they didn't hurt. That was my life. My name is Diana. And before that night, in the ballroom, before the laughter and the humiliation, there was a pattern I ignored for years, because I didn't want to believe it was real. I grew up in a family where success wasn't just admired, it was worshipped. My father built a powerful real estate company from nothing. My mother perfected the image of a flawless family. And my younger sister, Madison, she became everything they ever wanted. Smart, ambitious, polished, ruthless in the way that made people respect her. By 28, she was already a senior executive in my father's company, closing million-dollar deals and walking into rooms like she owned them. And then there was me, the older daughter, the one who was supposed to set the example, but somehow became the disappointment. Not because I failed, but because I chose differently. I didn't want boardrooms and negotiations. I didn't want to chase money or status. I wanted something quieter, something that felt real. I became a teacher. 3rd grade. Kids who struggled to read, kids who needed someone to believe in them when no one else did. And to me that mattered. It mattered more than anything. But in my family, It was invisible. At every dinner, every holiday, every gathering, the same script played out. Madison, tell everyone about your latest deal. My mother would say, her voice filled with pride. And Madison would smile, flip her hair, and describe another success story while everyone leaned in impressed. Then the attention would shift to me. And Diana, you're still teaching. The way she said teaching sounded like unemployed. I would try. I really tried. I would talk about my students, about Emma who learned to read after months of struggling, about the little victories that meant everything in my world. But no one listened. My mother would nod distractedly. My father would check his phone. The conversation would move on before I finished my sentence. And every time, a small part of me shrank. Do you know what it feels like to slowly disappear in your own family, to sit at the same table, but feel like a stranger? To realize that no matter what you do, it will never be enough because you're not playing the game they value. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was happy. And in many ways I was. But there's a difference between being happy and being unseen. And the worst part, I started to believe them. I started to question my choices, to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I should have done more, earned more, become someone they could finally be proud of. That's how it works. It's not one moment that breaks you. It's repetition. It's years of being measured against a standard you never agreed to, until one day you stop asking, "Am I happy?" and start asking, "Am I enough?" But here's the truth I didn't understand back then. I was never the problem. The problem was the way they defined worth. And I wasn't going to realize that fully until everything exploded. Until the night they pushed too far. If you've ever felt like you had to earn love from your own family, if you've ever been compared to someone else until you started losing yourself, I need you to stay with this story. Because what comes next will hit harder than you expect. And before we continue, do me a quick favor, hit that like button and subscribe if this story is already pulling you in. It helps more than you think, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. What if the person your family looked down on the most was the only one who ever truly saw you? Not your last name, not your background, not your potential according to their standards, but you, the real you, the version of you that existed before all the expectations, before the comparisons, before you learned how to shrink yourself just to survive in your own home. That's how Marcus entered my life, quietly, unexpectedly, and in a way that would change everything, even if I didn't realize it at the time. I met him on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that feels forgettable before it even ends. I had just finished a long day of parent-teacher conferences. I was exhausted, mentally drained, and honestly, a little invisible. I walked into a small coffee shop near my school, the kind of place where nobody notices you and nobody asks questions. It was crowded, every table taken, every chair filled except one. Across from a man who was typing on his laptop like the world depended on it. I hesitated. I almost walked away. Because that's what I'd learned to do. Avoid retreat, not take up space. But something made me stay. "Is this seat taken?" I asked. He looked up, and I still remember that moment clearly. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. His eyes were warm. His smile was simple. "No, please." That was it. No grand entrance. No sparks flying. Just permission. I sat down. We didn't talk much that first day. He worked. I graded papers. But when I got up to leave, he said something that caught me off guard. "Same time tomorrow." I should have laughed it off. I should have said no. But instead, I came back. And so did he. For 2 months we shared that same table. Same time. Same quiet rhythm. And slowly something began to shift. He told me he worked in education. I told him I taught 3rd grade. And that was enough. Do you know how rare that is? To not feel the need to explain yourself, to not feel judged or measured or compared. He never asked how much money I made. Never asked about my family status, never tried to impress me with achievements or titles. He just listened. Really listened. When I talked about my students, he leaned in like it mattered. Like I mattered. And that was new to me. Because in my world, being heard was something you had to earn. With success. With results. with something tangible you could show. But with Marcus, I didn't have to earn anything. I just had to be there. We started dating. Nothing extravagant. No luxury restaurants or expensive gifts. Just simple things. Farmers markets, long walks, movie nights in his small apartment where he cooked dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. And somewhere between those quiet evenings and those effortless conversations, I fell in love. Not with what he had, but with who he was, and maybe more importantly, with who I was when I was with him. I wasn't the disappointing daughter. I wasn't the less successful sister. I wasn't the one trying to prove something. I was just Diana. And that was enough. But here's where it gets complicated. Because the moment something real enters your life, it forces you to confront everything fake you've been living with. I knew my family wouldn't understand him. I knew they would reduce him to a job title, a salary, a number they could compare and judge. So I waited. 3 weeks before I told them. And when I did, it went exactly how I feared. He works in education, my mother said, her voice heavy with disappointment. What does that even mean? It means he helps people learn. I said, so he's a teacher. Like you. The way she said, like you felt like a verdict. I remember looking at Marcus after that conversation, waiting for him to react, to defend himself, to prove something, but he didn't. Instead, he took my hand and said something I didn't fully understand back then. I don't want your family to like me for what I have. I want them to like me for who I am. At the time, it sounded idealistic, almost naive, but now I realize it was the strongest thing anyone had ever said. Because most people spend their lives trying to impress others, trying to prove their worth in ways that can be measured. But Marcus, he refused to play that game. And without realizing it, he was teaching me something too. That love doesn't need validation. That worth isn't something you negotiate. That the right person doesn't make you feel smaller. They remind you how to stand. If you've ever met someone who made you feel seen in a way you didn't even know you needed, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments, because sometimes the quietest love stories are the ones that change everything. What hurts more than being insulted once? Being slowly broken, over and over again, by the same people in the same room, until it starts to feel normal, not dramatic enough to call abuse, not obvious enough for anyone to step in, just quiet humiliation, repeated so many times that one day you stop reacting and start accepting. That was my reality for years. Not one big moment, not one explosion, just a pattern, perfectly consistent, perfectly cruel, in the way only family can be. Every holiday dinner, every birthday, every Sunday brunch, the script never changed. It always started the same way. My mother's voice, warm and proud, Madison, tell everyone about your latest deal. And just like that, the spotlight shifted to my sister. Madison would smile effortlessly, leaning back in her chair like she belonged there because she did. She'd talk about contracts, negotiations, million-dollar numbers that made people lean forward impressed. My father would nod along, eyes bright with approval. The guests would ask questions, laugh at her jokes, admire her ambition. It was a performance, and she was the star. Then came my turn. Not invited, just acknowledged. And Diana, you're still teaching. That word teaching never sounded neutral. It sounded like a limitation, like something temporary, like a mistake I hadn't corrected yet. I would sit up a little straighter, forcing myself to speak with confidence I didn't feel. Yes, 3rd grade this year. I have a student, Emma, who couldn't read 6 months ago. Last week she finished her first chapter book. That's nice, dear. My mother would cut me off gently, already glancing at her phone. Conversation over. Just like that. Do you know what that does to a person not being yelled at? Not being attacked. Just dismissed. Like your words don't carry weight. Like your world doesn't matter. Like you don't matter. At first I tried harder. I thought maybe I just wasn't explaining it well enough. Maybe if I told the story better, made it more impressive, added more detail, they would finally understand. They didn't, because they weren't listening. And the worst part, everyone else followed their lead. When the people closest to you treat you like you're unimportant, the rest of the room learns to do the same. It became invisible but undeniable. The way conversations shifted away from me, the way eyes drifted when I spoke, the way silence filled the space where encouragement should have been. It wasn't loud, but it was constant. And constant is what breaks you. I remember one moment more clearly than the others. Last spring, my students put on a play. They had worked for months, memorizing lines, building props out of cardboard, practicing every day after school. It wasn't professional, it wasn't perfect, but it meant everything to them and to me, so I invited my parents. I even asked them personally, "Dad, it's on the 15th at 3:00. I'd really love for you to come." He didn't even look up at first, just flipped through his calendar like I had asked for a business meeting. "I have real meetings, Diana. Maybe next time." Real meetings. I nodded like I understood, like I agreed, but inside something sank, because I knew the truth. He had visited Madison's office 12 times that year. 12. I counted. He had time, just not for me. The night of the play, I scanned the audience from backstage. Parents, siblings, friends. Every child had someone there. Every child except one, mine. When the curtain closed and the applause filled the room, I smiled for my students. I celebrated with them. I told them how proud I was. But on the drive home, the silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. That's when it started to change. Not outside, inside. Because humiliation doesn't always explode. Sometimes it settles. It builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day you realize you've been shrinking for years, and no one noticed. Not even you. By the time that retirement dinner came around, I wasn't shocked anymore. I was prepared, or at least I thought I was. But there's a difference between expecting disrespect and experiencing it in front of 150 people. If you've ever been slowly worn down by the people who were supposed to support you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room where you should have belonged, then you already know how this feels. And trust me, what happened next didn't just break the pattern, it destroyed it completely. What if the quietest person in the room was actually the most dangerous one to underestimate? Not loud, not flashy, not trying to prove anything, just watching, waiting, letting everyone else believe exactly what they want to believe, until the moment comes when the truth can't be ignored anymore. That was Marcus, and I didn't fully understand it until it was almost too late. For 4 years, my family treated him like a background character in my life. Someone temporary, someone insignificant, someone they didn't need to take seriously. And the strangest part, he let them. He never corrected them, never defended himself, never tried to impress them or win their approval. He just existed quietly in their world, like a shadow they didn't bother to look at twice. At first I thought it was patience, maybe even kindness. I thought he was protecting me, avoiding conflict, choosing peace over pride. But slowly, I started to notice things that didn't fit that explanation. Small things, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The way he listened when people spoke, not just hearing words, but analyzing them. The way he stayed calm in situations where most people would react. The way he asked questions that seemed simple on the surface, but always landed deeper than expected. It wasn't just silence, it was control. I remember one dinner in particular. Madison was talking about a major deal, millions of dollars, complex negotiations, the kind of story my family loved. Everyone was impressed. Of course they were. And then, almost as an afterthought, Marcus asked a question. What was the long-term impact? The table went quiet for a second. Madison blinked. What do you mean? The deal sounds successful now, he said calmly. But how does it affect the people involved 5 years from now? It was such a simple question, but it changed the energy in the room. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone to call it out, but I felt it, the discomfort, the shift. Madison gave a vague answer and quickly moved on. My father redirected the conversation, and just like that it was over. But I noticed something else. Marcus didn't push, he didn't challenge, he didn't try to prove a point, he just let it go. And that's when I started to realize he wasn't trying to win arguments. He was observing, learning, understanding exactly who they were and exactly how far they would go. There were other moments too. The way he dressed, simple, consistent, never trying to match the luxury around him, but never looking out of place either. The way he handled money, quietly, confidently, without ever discussing it. The way he spoke about his work, always vague, always brief, never giving enough information for anyone to judge, but never lying either. I work in education, he would say, and that was it. My family filled in the blanks themselves: tutor, assistant, something small, something unimportant, and Marcus never corrected them. At the time, I didn't question it. Maybe I didn't want to, because if I'm honest, part of me believed what my family believed. Not fully, not consciously, but enough that I never pushed him for details, enough that I accepted the mystery without demanding clarity. And that's something I had to confront later, because the truth wasn't that Marcus was hiding something. The truth was, he was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the moment when silence would say more than any explanation ever could. I remember asking him, once late at night, when everything felt quiet and safe, "Why don't you ever tell them what you actually do?" He looked at me for a long time before answering, not avoiding the question, just choosing his words carefully, because it wouldn't change anything that matters. I frowned. It might make things easier. He shook his head slightly. If the only way to earn their respect is by proving I have something they value, then it's not real respect. That stayed with me, even though I didn't fully understand it at the time, because I was still stuck in their world, still believing that approval had to be earned, that value had to be demonstrated, that silence meant weakness. But Marcus, he saw something I didn't. He saw the pattern, the judgment, the way my family measured people before they knew them, and instead of fighting it, he let it play out. Completely. Fully. Until there was no room left for denial. That's the part people don't understand about restraint. It's not passive. It's strategic. It's knowing that sometimes the most powerful move is to wait. By the time that retirement dinner came around, I thought I knew Marcus. I thought I understood his calm, his silence, his patience. But I didn't. Not really. Because I hadn't seen what happened when he decided to stop being silent. And when that moment came, everything changed. Not just how my family saw him, but how I saw everything. What if I told you, the moment that broke me wasn't the insult, it was the seat they chose for me, not the words, not the laughter, but the quiet, calculated decision to put me where I didn't belong, where everyone could see exactly what they thought I was worth. Because humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers through details. And that night, every detail was designed to remind me of my place. The invitation itself should have been my first warning. It didn't arrive in a beautiful envelope like Madison's. No courier, no handwritten calligraphy, just an email, cold, efficient. "You are cordially invited," like I was a guest, not a daughter. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew. In my family, everything meant something, especially the small things. Then came the call. My mother's voice precise as always. "Diana, we need to discuss the seating arrangements. Not how are you, not are you coming. Seating, that's what mattered." I opened my laptop while she spoke, pulling up the layout of the ballroom. Round tables, perfectly arranged. A stage at the front. The closer you were to the stage, the more important you were. It wasn't subtle, it was a hierarchy. "You and Marcus will be at table 14, she said. I zoomed in. My stomach dropped. Table 14 wasn't just far, it was hidden. Back corner, right beside the kitchen doors. "Mom, that's the last table." I tried to keep my voice steady. "We have important guests," she replied instantly. "Business partners, investors, people your father actually works with." Actually, the word lingered. Like what I did didn't count. "Okay," I said. Because what else was there to say? Silence had always been my survival strategy. But she wasn't finished. "And Diana, wear something appropriate. Try not to talk too much about your little school. These people have real careers." Real careers. There it was, not loud, not cruel, just clear. I hung up the phone and sat there staring at the screen. Table 14, back corner, near the kitchen. I could already picture it. Servers rushing past, plates clattering, conversations drifting away before they even reached us. Out of sight, out of mind. Exactly where they thought I belonged. That night, Marcus found me sitting on the edge of the bed, still holding my phone. "They put us in the back, didn't they?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. "Do you want me to come?" he asked. And that question, it broke something open inside me, because part of me wanted to say no, to protect him, to keep him away from what I knew was coming. But another part, the part that had been shrinking for years, was tired of facing them alone. "Yes," I said. "Please come." He sat beside me, took my hand, and for a moment, everything felt steady again. "I've been quiet for 4 years, because you asked me to," he said softly. "But if they hurt you again, I won't stay silent." There was something different in his voice. Not anger. Not frustration. Something deeper. Something final. I looked at him, really looked at him like I was seeing something I had missed all this time. "Marcus, what do you mean?" He held my gaze for a second, then said, "I think it's time. Time for what I didn't ask." Maybe I was afraid of the answer. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every family dinner, every comment, every moment I had chosen. Silence over confrontation. I thought about the future, about the life Marcus and I wanted to build, about the children we had talked about having someday, and a question kept echoing in my head. What would I teach them? Would I teach them to smile when they're disrespected, to stay quiet when they're humiliated, to believe their worth depends on how others see them? No, I wouldn't. So why was I still living that way? The morning of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet, staring at rows of dresses that suddenly felt meaningless. What do you wear to your own humiliation? Something elegant, something invisible, something that makes you look like you belong, even when you know you don't. I chose a simple black dress, nothing special, nothing that would draw attention. Maybe part of me still hoped that if I didn't stand out, they wouldn't notice me. That night, when we arrived at the ballroom, everything was exactly as I imagined. Crystal chandeliers, soft music, people in designer gowns and tailored suits, laughter, confidence, power. And then, my mother at the entrance greeting guests like she owned the room. She kissed my cheek lightly, barely looking at me. "You came, not 'I'm glad you're here,' just surprise." Her eyes shifted to Marcus, a brief pause, a forced smile. "And you brought him, not his name, not her son-in-law, just him." "Yes," I said. My voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Table 14, she added quickly. "We know," Marcus replied calmly. We walked through the room together, past tables, filled with laughter and recognition, past people who didn't even try to hide their curiosity. I could feel it, the whispers, the glances, the judgment. And then we reached it. Table 14. It was worse than I expected. Not just near the kitchen, practically in it. Every time the doors swung open, heat and noise spilled into our space. Servers brushed past our chairs. Plates clinked. Conversations faded before they reached us. It wasn't just a bad seat. It was a statement. A message. This is where you belong. I sat down slowly, trying to keep my composure. But inside, something was cracking. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to know this night wasn't going to end quietly. And for the first time, I didn't want it to. What if the worst moment of your life didn't happen in private, but was staged, amplified, and handed to a room full of people like entertainment? Not an accident, not a slip of the tongue, but something intentional, something delivered with a smile, a microphone, and perfect timing. Because that's what that moment was. It wasn't just humiliation, it was a performance, and I was the main act. The lights dimmed slowly, the orchestra faded into silence, and the entire ballroom turned toward the stage. 150 faces, 150 expectations, 150 people ready to celebrate my father. And somewhere in the back corner, near the kitchen doors, I sat gripping the edge of my chair, trying to disappear into the background noise that didn't quite reach me. My father stepped up to the microphone, confident, as always, his presence filling the room like it belonged to him because it did. 40 years, he began, his voice smooth practice. 40 years of building something from nothing. Applause, nods, admiration. He knew exactly how to hold an audience. He always did. He thanked his partners, his investors, his friends. He praised my mother, calling her his rock, his everything. More applause. More smiles. Then came Madison. My daughter Madison, he said, his voice swelling with pride. The future of this company. She stood gracefully, accepting the applause like she had rehearsed it 100 times. Cameras flashed. Glasses lifted. She looked perfect. Exactly what they wanted her to be. I waited. Not because I expected much, but because some part of me still hoped, still believed that maybe just once I would be acknowledged without being diminished. My father's eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on me. "And Diana," he said. A pause. Too long, too deliberate. The room shifted slightly, attention turning toward the back where I sat. She's still trying to figure out what to do with her life. Laughter. Not loud, not explosive, but enough. Enough to make my chest tighten. Enough to make my hands go cold. He smiled like it was a harmless joke, but we love her anyway. Anyway. That word echoed louder than the laughter. Anyway meant despite. Despite being less. Despite not measuring up. Despite being me. I felt every eye on me now. Some sympathetic, some amused, some curious. And none of them mattered as much as the two people standing on that stage smiling like they hadn't just reduced their daughter to a punchline. I should have looked down. I should have stayed quiet. That's what I always did. But something inside me didn't move. I just sat there frozen between shame and something else I couldn't quite name yet. And then it got worse. My mother stepped forward. Of course she did. She always knew how to take a moment and sharpen it. "I'd like to say something about family," she began, her voice light, almost affectionate. The room softened. People leaned in. This was the emotional part, the sincere part, or at least, that's what they thought. "We've been so blessed," she continued. "Our youngest, Madison, has made us incredibly proud." More applause, more smiles. Then she turned her gaze toward the back, toward me. I felt it before she even spoke. "And then there's Diana." The words landed differently this time, heavier, more precise. She chose a different path. A small pause. A controlled breath. She teaches elementary school. Another pause. At least, I think it's elementary. A ripple of laughter. I could feel it building. Not yet explosive, but coming. And then she delivered it. Perfectly timed, perfectly aimed. But you know what? At least she found a husband. A beat. Just long enough for anticipation to form, even if we don't know what he does for a living. And the room erupted. Not polite laughter, not restrained laughter, real laughter. Loud, unfiltered. The kind that fills every corner of the room and leaves no space for you to breathe. I heard someone clap. I heard glasses clink. I heard my own heartbeat louder than anything else. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just crack, it broke. Completely. Because this wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't quiet dismissal or polite indifference. This was public. Deliberate. Final. My father laughed too. Not surprised. Not uncomfortable. Just entertained. My sister smiled, lifting her glass like this was all part of the show. And me, I sat there unable to move. Unable to speak, trapped in a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Do you know what it feels like to be reduced to a joke in front of people who will never forget it? To know that tomorrow you won't just be Diana, you'll be that daughter, the one they laughed at, the one who wasn't enough. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to say something, anything to stop it. But years of silence don't disappear in a single moment. They hold you in place. They remind you who you've been taught to be. So I stayed. I stayed in that chair. I stayed in that silence. I stayed until I realized something that changed everything. Because while the room was laughing, while my family was enjoying the moment they had created, there was one person who wasn't. Marcus. I turned to look at him, expecting to see the same calm, the same quiet patience he had always shown. But what I saw instead made my breath catch. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking down. He wasn't avoiding the moment. He was watching the stage. completely still, completely focused. And then, slowly, he stood up. No rush, no hesitation, just one deliberate movement that cut through the noise like it didn't belong there. At first, no one noticed. The laughter was still echoing. The music hadn't resumed yet. But I noticed. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't over. Not even close. What if the moment everyone thought was the end of your humiliation was actually the beginning of something they would never forget? What if the person they laughed at wasn't the weakest in the room, but the only one who had been choosing silence until now? Because the second Marcus stood up, everything shifted. Not loudly, not instantly, but in a way you could feel before you could understand. The laughter didn't stop right away. It echoed, bounced off the chandeliers, lingered in the air like it belonged there. People were still smiling, still sipping their drinks, still caught in the aftershock of the joke my mother had just delivered. And then, heads started to turn, slowly at first. One table, then another, like a ripple moving across water. Because someone had noticed. A man standing. Not clapping, not laughing, just standing. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't slam his chair back or make a scene. He simply rose, straightened his jacket, and began to walk. One step, then another, calm, measured, intentional. The kind of movement that doesn't ask for attention, but demands it anyway. Marcus, I whispered, my voice barely there. I didn't reach for him. I didn't try to stop him. Because something inside me knew. This wasn't something I could interrupt. This had been building long before tonight. The distance from table 14 to the stage had never felt longer. Every step he took seemed to stretch time itself. Conversations faded. Laughter died down. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It unraveled into silence piece by piece, as people realized something was happening that wasn't part of the program. My father saw him first. Of course he did. A man like him notices disruption. His smile tightened. Not gone. Just strained. Can I help you? He asked into the microphone, trying to keep control of the room. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He reached the stage, stepped up, and turned to face the audience. 150 people. Watching. Waiting. Confused. And then he did something no one expected. He leaned into the microphone. May I have a moment? His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried, clear, steady, unshaken. The kind of voice that doesn't fight for attention, because it already has it. My mother moved quickly, heels clicking against the stage floor. This really isn't the time, she said, reaching for the microphone. Marcus stepped back, just enough to avoid her hand. Not aggressive, not defensive, just controlled. I think it's exactly the time. The room held its breath. My father forced a small laugh, trying to soften the tension. Marcus, is it? Why don't we discuss this privately? Privately, the word hung there, heavy with meaning. That's where things like this were supposed to stay. Hidden, managed, controlled. But Marcus shook his head. No, one word, simple, final. And everything changed. You could feel it. The shift from curiosity to anticipation. Because now, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a moment. For 4 years, Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the room. Not avoiding a single gaze. I've sat quietly at your tables. I've listened to the comments, the assumptions, the jokes. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not laughter this time, something else. Recognition, discomfort. My mother stepped forward again. This is inappropriate. For 4 years, he repeated, not raising his voice, not acknowledging the interruption. I've watched you treat your daughter like she's less than she is. That landed. Hard. The room went still. My chest tightened. My hands trembled in my lap. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about me. About everything I had never said. Everything I had swallowed. And I stayed quiet, he said. Because she asked me to. His eyes found mine across the room. And for a second, everything else disappeared. No crowd. No stage. Just that look. Soft. Steady. Certain. But I won't stay quiet anymore. The words didn't echo. They settled. Like something inevitable had just been spoken into existence. Madison pushed forward, now her composure cracking just enough to show it mattered. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Who do you think you are?" The question hung in the air, not rhetorical, not dismissive, real, because suddenly, no one in that room was sure. Marcus smiled slightly, not smug, not amused, just calm. "That's a fair question," he said. He reached into his jacket, and for a split second, the entire room leaned forward. Not physically, but collectively, like everyone was waiting for something they couldn't name yet. My heart stopped. The envelope. I had seen it before. The night before. The insurance he mentioned. But he didn't pull it out. Not yet. Instead, he adjusted his cuff, glanced briefly at my father, then back at the crowd. "My name is Marcus Smith Parker," he said, and something in the room broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but unmistakably. Because names matter. And that name meant something to more people in that room than I realized. I saw it happen in real time. The flicker of recognition, the widening eyes, the sudden stillness. Jennifer Walsh stood up so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "Wait," she whispered. My father frowned. "What is this?" But Marcus wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at everyone else. "I believe some of you may have heard of my company." Silence. Complete. Absolute. The kind of silence that only exists right before something changes forever. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just him defending me. This wasn't just him responding to a joke. This was something bigger. Something he had been holding back for years. And now, it was finally here. What if the moment they laughed the hardest was the exact moment they sealed their own humiliation? What if everything they believed about you, everything they assumed, judged, whispered behind polite smiles, collapsed in a single sentence? Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once. Like a glass wall shattering in silence before anyone even realizes it's gone. Because that's what happened next. And no one in that room was ready for it. The silence after Marcus spoke, his name wasn't empty, it was loaded. You could feel it pressing against every wall, every table, every person, trying to process what they had just heard. "I believe some of you may have heard of my company," he said. No one moved. No one interrupted. Even the servers near the kitchen doors had stopped, trays frozen midair, because something was shifting, and everyone could feel it. My father tried to recover first. Of course he did. "And what company would that be?" he asked, his voice controlled but thinner than before. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't fill the silence. He let it stretch, just long enough to make everyone lean in. "EduSpark." One word. That's all it took. And then it happened. A ripple. A reaction that started small, but spread faster than anyone could contain. A man near the front pulled out his phone. Another leaned toward his wife, whispering urgently. A woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, it can't be," someone muttered. But it was, and the realization moved through the room like electricity. Not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. Jennifer Walsh was already standing. "I knew it," she said, her voice sharp with shock. "I knew I recognized him." My father frowned, confusion breaking through his composure. Recognized him from where? She turned to him, almost incredulous. EduSpark, the educational technology company. They were just valued at over $200 million. It was on the cover of Forbes 3 months ago. The words landed like a bomb. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just final. I watched my father's face change. Not instantly, not completely, but enough. Enough to see the cracks forming beneath everything he had built his identity on. "That's not possible," Madison said quickly, her voice too sharp, too fast. "There's no way, I assure you." Marcus interrupted calmly. "It is." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The room had already shifted around him. Because now people weren't looking at him with curiosity. They were looking with recognition. Respect. Interest. Everything my family had withheld was suddenly there. And it wasn't because he had changed. It was because they finally understood. Forbes 30 under 30, someone whispered from the crowd. CNN interview, another voice added. Wall Street Journal, I saw that article. The murmurs grew. Not laughter, not judgment, something else. Something my family had always valued. Validation. I felt my breath catch. Not because of the money, not because of the status, but because of what it exposed. 4 years. 4 years of assumptions, of dismissal, of quiet superiority, and all it took was one word to destroy it. Spark. My mother stepped forward, her hands trembling just slightly. Marcus, why didn't you tell us? Her voice had changed. Softer, careful, measured, as if she could somehow rewind the last few minutes by choosing the right tone now. Marcus looked at her not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far more unsettling. Clarity. You never asked. The room went still again. Because that was the truth. Simple, undeniable. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Well, this is impressive. We should talk. There could be opportunities now. Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't soften it. Just no. And that word hit harder than everything that came before. Because now the power had shifted. Completely. Madison stepped forward, her confidence cracking at the edges. You expect us to believe this, she said. But her voice didn't carry the same certainty anymore. Marcus reached into his jacket. This time, he pulled out the envelope, the same one I had seen the night before. The insurance. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and removed a document. Thick, official, real. This is a signed agreement, he said, holding it up just enough for the front rows to see. A $5 million grant to fund STEM programs in underprivileged schools. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. 5 million. Not hypothetical, not potential. Real, tangible. The first recipient, he continued, his voice steady, is Lincoln Elementary. Suddenly, it mattered. Suddenly, I mattered. I felt tears rising before I could stop them. Not because of the number, not because of the recognition, but because for the first time, someone was standing in front of my family and refusing to let them define me. Your daughter, Marcus said, turning toward my parents, shows up every day for children who have nothing. She changes lives in ways that don't fit into your balance sheets. No one spoke. No one laughed, because there was nothing left to laugh at. And you called her a disappointment. The words didn't need emphasis. They didn't need volume. They were already louder than anything else in the room. My father looked down. My mother didn't speak. Madison didn't move. And for the first time in my life, they had no response. Because the truth had already been said, and there was no way to undo it. What if the real victory wasn't making them regret what they did, but finally realizing you don't need them to approve of you anymore? Not their praise, not their validation, not even their apology. Because sometimes the most powerful ending isn't revenge. It's walking away with nothing left to prove. That was the moment I didn't expect. Not the applause, not the shock, not the silence that followed Marcus's words. But what came after? Because after the truth is exposed, after the masks fall, after the room finally sees what you've always known, there's only one question left. What do you do now? I stood there just a few steps from the stage. My heart still racing, my hands still trembling, the weight of everything pressing against my chest. For years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought if they ever understood, if they ever saw me for who I really was, it would feel like relief. Like closure. Like something inside me would finally settle. But it didn't, because the truth is, understanding doesn't erase what's already been done. My mother was the first to speak. Of course she was. Diana, honey. Her voice was softer now. Careful. Fragile in a way I had never heard before. We didn't know. I looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who had spent years measuring my worth against a standard I never chose. Would it have mattered, I asked. The question landed heavier than anything Marcus had said. Because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about something deeper. Something they couldn't fix with a different tone or a better explanation. My father stepped forward, his instincts shifting from authority to negotiation. Of course it would have mattered, he said quickly. We just wanted the best for you. The best. I almost smiled, because I had heard those words my entire life. No, I said quietly but firmly. You wanted something that looked like success to you. The room was still watching. Still listening. But now, they weren't watching a spectacle. They were witnessing something real. My voice didn't shake this time. It didn't shrink or soften. It stayed exactly where it needed to be. You didn't respect me when you thought I had nothing, I continued. So don't tell me it would be different now. My mother's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, or maybe just better performed. I couldn't tell anymore, and for the first time, it didn't matter. Madison tried to step in her confidence, barely holding together. "This is unfair," she said. "How are we supposed to know?" Marcus answered before I could. "You weren't supposed to know," he said calmly. "You were supposed to care." Silence again, not uncomfortable, not tense, just clear, because that was it. That was the truth no one in that room could argue with. Respect shouldn't require proof. Love shouldn't require credentials. And yet, that's exactly what my family had demanded. I took a slow breath, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something lighter, something that felt like release. "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "And I'm definitely not here for a business conversation." My father's expression tightened. He understood what that meant. "Then what do you want?" he asked. I looked at him, at my mother, at my sister, 3 people who had defined my worth for most of my life. And for the first time, they didn't. "Respect," I said. "Not because of who my husband is, not because of what he's built, but because of who I am." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the room like something permanent. "And if you can't give me that," I paused. Not for effect, just to make sure I meant what I was about to say. "Then I'm done." There it was. No anger, no drama, just truth. Simple. Final. My mother reached out slightly, as if she could stop what was happening. "Diana, please." I shook my head. "No more please. No more later. No more pretending this is something it's not." I felt Marcus's hand at my back. Steady. Supportive. Not leading me. Not pulling me away. Just there. "I have a life," I said. "A real one. One that doesn't need your approval to exist." And then, I turned, not to make a statement, not to create a moment, but because I was ready to leave. We walked toward the exit together. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just done. I could feel the eyes on us, the whispers starting again, but they didn't feel the same anymore, because this time, they didn't define me. We reached the doors, the noise of the ballroom fading behind us with every step. And when we finally stepped outside into the cool night air, something inside me finally settled. Not because they had changed, not because the past was fixed, but because I had. I turned to Marcus, my voice quieter now. "Do you think I did the right thing?" He looked at me for a moment, then smiled. Not proud, not surprised, just certain. "You stopped asking for permission to be yourself," he said. "That's always the right thing." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for years. And in that moment, I understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Your worth isn't something other people decide. It's something you accept. Or you don't. And for the first time, I finally did.